There comes a very specific moment when a narcissistic person feels they no longer control you. It does not look like loud anger. It does not always look like rage. It often looks like silence, a pause, a strange stillness on their side, a blank moment they cannot explain. Because for the first time since they entered your life, the supply is gone. The mirror goes dark. The person they used to pull from is now standing somewhere they cannot reach. And what starts happening inside them after that is something many people will never understand unless they have lived through it. Because the same person who once made you feel small, replaceable, unseen, and confused starts to orbit you in quiet ways they cannot even explain to themselves. That orbit, that tense and private pull toward the version of you they can no longer control, is what people loosely mean when they say the narcissist becomes your slave until death. Not in a literal way, not in a physical way, but in a psychological way. Their nervous system becomes tied to the loss of you. Stay with me, because this matters more than most people realize. What I am about to say may name something you have felt for years but never had words for. A narcissist does not love you in the healthy sense of love. They use you. They feed on what you bring. And that difference changes everything. You were not truly being cherished. You were being harvested. You were not standing beside them as an equal partner. You were serving as a source, a steady stream of emotion, attention, comfort, and energy that kept their fragile inner world from falling apart. That is why they seemed so intense in the beginning. Not because they deeply saw your soul, but because they sensed your value to them. They noticed your empathy. They noticed your patience. They noticed how you explained yourself, how you stayed calm, how you tried to fix tension, how you absorbed chaos and turned it into peace. For a long time, they treat all of that like endless currency. They spend it freely because they think it will never run out. They assume your understanding will always be there. They assume your forgiveness will keep returning. They assume your loyalty can be stretched past every insult, every cold silence, every twisted story, every moment that made you question your own memory. But something eventually changes inside a person who has been used this way for too long. It is quiet. It is deep. It almost feels sacred. You begin to feel a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot repair, a kind of loneliness that gets worse when they are near, a kind of confusion that no conversation with them can solve. And that exhaustion is not weakness. It is your nervous system finally telling the truth. It is your body speaking what your mind has been too loyal to admit. This person is not safe. This person was never safe. No amount of love poured into them will fill the empty space they carry inside. That shift begins the second you stop over-explaining yourself. It begins when you stop chasing closure from someone whose power depends on your confusion. It begins when you stop reacting to the bait, the cold shoulder, the sudden sweetness, the fake crisis, the jealousy games, the rewriting of history, the gaslighting that made you wonder if your own mind could be trusted. The moment you stop taking part in the emotional system they built around your pain, something powerful happens. You become unreadable to them. And an unreadable person is deeply unsettling to a narcissist. Why? Because their whole sense of self is built through the reactions of other people. They do not stand on a stable inner identity. They stand on performance. And every performance needs an audience. You were that audience. You clapped when they needed praise. You cried when they needed power. You apologized when they needed innocence. You stayed when they needed proof they were still wanted. Then one day you stop. And the second you stop, the whole stage shakes. Suddenly they are standing in the light with no script, no reaction, no mirror, no emotional feedback, just the sharp echo of their own emptiness. This is where the so-called slavery begins. Listen carefully here because this part gets misunderstood. No one becomes literal property. This is not about control in the physical sense. It is about psychological fixation. What really happens is more subtle and more lasting. The narcissist becomes obsessed with the version of you they can no longer move, bend, frighten, or pull back in. They become haunted by your calm, haunted by your distance, haunted by that new quiet strength in your voice that no longer carries fear. They start watching from a distance. They ask mutual friends about you in casual ways that are not casual at all. They appear in places where they think you might be. They send messages that look random but are carefully designed to check whether the door is still open. And when you do not answer, especially when you do not answer, the obsession grows deeper. Because very little disturbs a narcissist more than a former source of supply who has found self-respect. You become the unfinished question in their life. The one person they could not fully break. The one mirror that walked away and did not shatter. On the surface, they may replace you fast, sometimes shockingly fast. They may show off a new relationship, a new image, a new story, a new performance. But underneath all of that is a quiet and lifelong awareness that you saw them more clearly than they wanted, and you still chose to leave. That awareness stays, it follows them, it becomes a kind of private leash around their mind. And if this is already hitting something real inside you, stay with me, because the next part explains why so many people accidentally break their own freedom right when it starts working. This is where most people go back. This is where most people answer the text. This is where the trap quietly opens again. If you do not understand the mechanism, you will feel tempted to reset it. You will want to check on them. You will want to explain one more time. You will want to send one last message, offer one more chance, answer one more apology, correct one more lie. But every time you step back into that old pattern, you feed the very system that was starving. Narcissistic people are deeply attached to emotional reaction. Your pain tells them they still matter. Your anger tells them they still have power. Your tears tell them they can still reach inside you and move things around. Even your hatred becomes fuel because hatred still means they occupy space in your mind. The one thing that truly weakens their hold is indifference. Real indifference, not fake indifference performed for attention, not loud indifference announced online, not the kind that still hopes to be seen. I mean the deep, settled, spiritual indifference of a person who finally understands that this is not a mystery to solve. It is a pattern to release. And when you reach that level of inner stillness, you stop being a person they can act upon and become a wound they cannot close. That wound follows them into future relationships, future arguments, future lonely nights when sleep will not come, and they do not understand why. If this is speaking to a part of you that has been waiting a long time to hear the truth, keep going, because we are only getting to the center now. The reason you were chosen was not because you were weak. That is one of the biggest lies survivors carry. You were chosen because you were strong in a very specific way. You had depth, you had loyalty, you had compassion, you could see pain in others and still choose tenderness. You were the kind of person who could love someone through their worst moments and still believe there was goodness somewhere inside them. In a healthy relationship, that quality would have been valued. Here, it was exploited. So now the work is not to hate your softness. The work is to stop blaming your best traits for someone else's hunger. Your empathy was not the problem. Your empathy given to the wrong person was the problem. Your love was not the problem. Your love poured into a bottomless container was the problem. And the healing ahead of you is not about becoming cold. It is not about turning hard, shutting down, or becoming impossible to reach. It is about becoming discerning. Keep your softness, but guard the gate. Keep your warmth, but test for safety. Keep your ability to love deeply, but understand that deep access is earned. It is not handed out because someone is charming, intense, wounded, dramatic, or magnetic. Real access is earned through consistency, through accountability, through emotional safety, through truth that does not shift every week, through actions that match words long after the first rush fades. And here is something almost no one tells you clearly enough. The longer you stay in your peace, the more the narcissist begins to unravel, not because you are attacking them, not because you are playing games, but because you are no longer doing invisible work for them. You are no longer regulating their feelings. You are no longer carrying their projections. You are no longer translating their cruelty into something forgivable. You are no longer steadying the identity they cannot hold on their own. Without your labor, they are left face to face with themselves. And for a narcissistic person, that can feel unbearable. That is why they often circle back, sometimes after weeks, sometimes after months, sometimes after years. They return with apologies that sound practiced because they are practiced. They return with insight that sounds borrowed because it is borrowed. They return with promises that sound urgent because desperation can mimic growth for a little while. Do not miss that. Desperation can sound exactly like change when you still want the old dream to be real, but your healing is tested there, not by feeling nothing. Feeling nothing is not the goal. The real test is whether you can feel something and still not move. That is freedom. That is strength. That is the moment your life begins to belong to you again. You have to understand the loneliness inside a narcissistic person if you want to fully grasp what you are walking away from. Beneath the arrogance, beneath the mockery, beneath the cold stare and cutting words is a person who has almost no real intimacy with anyone, not with you, not with others, not even with themselves. Because true intimacy requires something they cannot tolerate. It requires being seen without performance. It requires honesty without costume. It requires dropping the act. And that feels dangerous to them. So every time closeness gets real, they damage it. Every time tenderness appears, they twist it. Every time someone comes near the truth of who they are, they distract, punish, disappear, or attack. That means every relationship they enter after you will often become another version of the same empty pattern, different face, same hollowness, different scene, same script. Somewhere deep down they know this. They may never say it out loud. They may cover it with confidence, beauty, money, status, attention, seduction, superiority, or blame. But inside there is often a quiet knowing that everything repeats because nothing ever really changes. And your absence becomes one of the loudest reminders of that truth. Not because you were perfect, not because you were magical, but because you came close to reaching the part of them they hide from almost everyone. Your love was real enough to expose how false so much else had become, and that is why they do not fully release you in the deepest psychological sense. It is not love in the healthy meaning of love. It is fixation. It is unfinished business. It is the torment of losing access to someone who once gave them a glimpse of another life. So if you have ever wondered why they seem able to move on and still remain strangely tied to your shadow, this is why. It is not that they suddenly became soulful. It is not that they finally learned real love. It is that your departure made their emptiness louder. And once that sound gets inside them, it never fully goes away. Keep listening, because the next shift is the one that changes everything. This is the part that sets you free for real. The deepest shift happens when you stop needing them to understand what they did. Read that again in your heart. Your real freedom begins when you no longer need the apology, the recognition, the confession, the final message where they suddenly admit it all and hand your reality back to you in neat words. For a long time, many people believed that if the narcissist would just understand, then healing could begin. But their understanding was never the doorway. Your understanding was. The day you stop waiting for them to validate what happened is the day their power collapses in full. From that point on, whatever they say, whatever story they build, whatever performance they stage to pull you back in lands on a different version of you. A steadier version, a wiser version, a version that is rebuilt from the inside out. A person who now knows that peace is not boring, calm is not emptiness, stability is not a lack of passion, safety is not the death of love. In fact, safety is where real love can finally breathe, and that new version of you becomes impossible for them to understand. They study it, but they cannot decode it. They watch it, but they cannot reproduce it. Because you have done the one thing they have struggled to do. You chose yourself, fully, quietly, without needing a stage, without asking for applause, without making a scene out of your healing. And that repeated choice, made daily in 1,000 small ways, becomes the chain that ties them to the memory of you, while you keep walking forward into a life they can no longer touch. Somewhere in a still moment they did not expect, in a room that suddenly feels too quiet, in a silence that new attention cannot fill, they think of you. And they do not understand why their body tightens. They do not understand why nothing feels quite satisfying. They do not understand why every new mirror shows them a face they have spent years avoiding. Meanwhile, you are somewhere else entirely, breathing differently, sleeping differently, loving differently, no longer translating yourself for someone who never intended to truly hear you. And the farther you go, the more clearly you see that you were never the one who needed them to survive. You were the one they could not stop using without feeling the loss. Now here is the part many people miss, and you do not want to miss this. The narcissist's obsession is not always loud. It is not always dramatic. It does not always show up as constant calls or obvious stalking or giant public gestures. Sometimes it shows up as tiny tests, a random like, a quiet message on a birthday, a vague check-in after months of silence, a mutual friend mentioning their name out of nowhere, a sudden appearance near places connected to your old life, a story they post that feels aimed at you without naming you. These things are often not accidents, they are probes. Little feelers sent out to measure whether you are still emotionally available, whether the old pathway into your nervous system can still be reopened. And this is why surface healing is not enough. Looking strong is not enough. Sounding over it is not enough. You have to become internally unavailable to the old pattern. Because if your body still jumps every time their name appears, if your mind still rushes to explain, if your heart still confuses intensity with meaning, then the hook is still partly in. That is not shameful. It is human. Trauma bonds are real. Conditioning is real. Repetition is real. But so is repair. So is relearning. So is the slow return to self-trust. And that return changes everything. It means you begin noticing red flags earlier. You stop calling confusion chemistry. You stop calling inconsistency mystery. You stop calling emotional hunger passion. You stop calling control protection. You stop calling being chosen by a chaotic person proof of your worth. That is a massive shift. Do not rush past it. Because once your nervous system learns the difference between intensity and safety, your whole life begins to reorganize. And that is exactly why the narcissist keeps feeling your absence. You were once available to their pattern. Now you are no longer speaking that language, and when a person loses access to a pattern that once fed them so easily, they feel the break deeply, even if they never admit it. Stay with me here. The next piece may be the most important one of all, especially if part of you still wants justice in a form you can see. Justice in these situations rarely arrives the way people imagine. It does not always come with public exposure, dramatic regret, or a final speech where the narcissist falls apart and admits every lie. Sometimes justice is quieter than that. Sometimes justice is the fact that they must keep living inside the same false self that costs them every real relationship they touch. Sometimes justice is that every new connection eventually hits the same wall. Sometimes justice is that they can collect attention and still feel starving. They can gather admiration and still feel unseen. They can win arguments and still lose peace. They can replace people and still never replace the one person whose withdrawal exposed the whole structure. Meanwhile, your justice can look like something almost boring from the outside, which is exactly why it is so powerful. Better sleep, clearer thinking, less anxiety in your chest, more space in your day, the return of appetite. The return of laughter that does not feel forced. The return of decisions that are not built around someone else's moods. The return of your own face in the mirror. This is what many survivors do not realize at first. Your healing does not need to be flashy to be massive. A quiet life can be a stunning victory after years of emotional chaos. A regulated nervous system can be the greatest revenge you never have to announce. And if you are in the stage where that peace still feels far away, do not panic. Healing is not a straight line. Some days you will feel free. Some days a memory will hit like weather. Some days you will want to break no contact just to prove something, say something, ask something, finish something. Do not let one emotional wave convince you the ocean has changed direction. Keep your hands off the old door. Keep walking. Keep choosing the version of you that no longer begs to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding. Because every day you refuse to re-enter that cycle, the old bond weakens and your real life gets stronger. And one day you will notice something almost unbelievable. Their name will come up and your body will stay calm. Their face will cross your mind and you will not chase it. That is not numbness. That is freedom. And when that freedom starts becoming natural, something beautiful and almost shocking begins to happen. You stop measuring your worth by who can keep you. You stop confusing being intensely wanted with being deeply loved. You stop thinking you have to bleed to prove loyalty. You stop trying to earn basic care by overgiving, over-explaining, and overextending. You begin to understand that love should not require the death of your nervous system. It should not require constant decoding, shrinking, fear, hypervigilance, or self-betrayal. Love should let you breathe. Love should leave room for your mind to stay clear. Love should not make you abandon your own reality just to keep the peace. And once you truly learn that, the whole old game starts looking different. The seduction loses its shine. The drama loses its glamour. The unpredictability stops feeling exciting and starts feeling expensive. That shift is priceless. Because from there, you do not just escape one narcissistic dynamic. You change the pattern that made it possible in the first place. You stop volunteering your soul to people who only know how to consume what they do not respect. You stop handing out deep access to people who have not shown emotional responsibility. You stop treating your own sensitivity like a flaw just because cruel people found ways to use it. And let this land clearly. Your gentleness is still a gift. Your loyalty is still a gift. Your emotional depth is still a gift. The assignment now is simply to place those gifts where they can live, grow, and be returned with care. That is the new look your life takes on after this kind of awakening. Cleaner, quieter, stronger, less dramatic, but far more real. And yes, the narcissist may continue to feel the loss of you in ways they cannot explain. They may keep checking the edges of your absence. They may keep carrying your memory like an unanswered question. But that is no longer your burden to manage. You are not here to help them understand the cost of losing you. Life will teach that in its own time, in its own way. Your only job is to keep moving toward the self you were always meant to return to. So if you feel a door opening inside you right now, do not ignore it. If something in you is finally getting tired of bleeding for people who never planned to bandage you, listen to that. If part of you is ready to stop translating your soul for someone committed to distortion, honor that. Because on the other side of this awareness is a version of you that has been waiting a long time, a calmer version, a clearer version, a version that does not chase what harms it, a version that no longer mistakes survival for love, a version that knows peace can feel unfamiliar at first simply because chaos was repeated, not because chaos was destiny. And that is the final truth. When you truly stop feeding the pattern, the narcissist may remain psychologically tied to the loss of your energy for years, maybe for life. They may revisit your memory in private moments. They may compare others to the version of you they no longer have access to. They may feel that old wound reopen every time they meet someone they cannot fully control. But your task is not to watch that happen. Your task is not to study their downfall, wait for proof, or stand by the window, hoping to see regret. Your task is to keep becoming, keep restoring, keep choosing the small, quiet, irreversible acts of self-respect that build a new life. Answer fewer old calls, trust your body faster, leave earlier when something feels wrong, speak more simply, apologize less for what is true, protect your peace like it matters, because it does. And if you hold that line long enough, one day you will wake up and realize the story is no longer about the narcissist at all. It is about you, your return, your clarity, your restored voice, your reclaimed life. They may remain chained to the memory of losing access to you, but you will be somewhere far beyond that old room, standing in a wider life, touched by better love, guided by deeper self-trust, and finally free in the place that matters most.